Well, hello, and you're tuned in to Seven. And here is your arbiter to accession to austerity. I'm Matthew Mills. And nipping at the heels of the recent budget, this is a lean, mean, fully stripped down short review of what's in the Chancellor's statement and what it means for us all. So, the Chancellor of the Exchequer, Jeremy Hunt, has finally delivered his much anticipated budget, ostensibly designed to plug the fiscal hole created by his predecessor, who must remain nameless. Mr Hunt's announcements were presaged, of course, with a carefully structured series of statements to manage expectations to prepare us all for some challenging times ahead. And sad to say, the Chancellor didn't disappoint. So here are a few key points about the budget and the implications for investors. Okay, so in traditional style, let's start with the bad news. First and foremost, the nil rate personal income tax allowance is going to stay at £12,570, and the basic rate of tax will still be payable on the next 37 odd thousand after that. Now, these thresholds for tax are going to remain frozen until at least 2028. If you think about it, what that means is that any increase in your income is going to push you closer to paying higher rates of tax. The point at which the highest rate of tax will start, that's at 45% for high earners, is also going to be reduced. So it's currently at 150,000, but that's going to come down to a little bit over 125,000 from April. And that means the highest rates of tax will pay more from next year. Also, some of us receive dividends from our investments, and there's an allowance for that at the moment. You can get £2,000 a year of dividends tax-free, but that's going to halve when we come around to April. Then it's going to halve again when we come around next year. And although that's relatively small, the impact on a higher rate taxpayer who's enjoying dividend income from the investments means that they're going to suffer a disproportionate increase in the additional cost of dividend income. Finally, the nil rate capital gains tax allowance, which was 12,300, is going to drop by, as promised, eye-watering amount. It's going to more than half to 6,300 from April 23, and then it's going to halve again to just over 3,000 from April 2024. So the tax on investments that are subject to capital gains tax could increase quite substantially for anyone relying on investment income, and particularly for higher rate taxpayers. But it's not all bad news. Some of it is kind of just mildly horrific. So first of all, the nil rate inheritance tax allowance is going to stay frozen at just over £300,000, along with the residence nil rate ban, which is about 175,000, and that's going to stay in place till 2028. And what that actually means is that as the value of your estate grows, it's more likely to attract death duty. So if prices double every 5 to 10 years, let's say, then it means that the excess as your estate grows is going to likely to pay more tax at 40%. Nothing you have to worry about in life, and nothing you will ever have to worry about, but something your beneficiaries might have to consider. And interestingly, the Office of Budget Responsibility estimates that this step alone in the budget is going to bring in an extra £1 billion a year into the Treasury. And if you think about it, that also makes sense because most of us have our wealth tied up in our homes. Some other good news, the pension annual contribution allowance stays the same at 40,000, and the lifetime allowance, the total amount you can save in a pension, stays at just over £1 million, and that's unchanged until about 2026. Plus, the rates of income tax relief on pension contributions also remain unchanged. Linked to that, the ISA annual contribution allowance also remains unchanged at 20,000. And again, the overarching point here is that the incentives for medium and long-term investment remain attractive, and that's because the government doesn't want to kick the can down the road too far and doesn't want us not saving for our future, because there's unfortunately no money for that either. Some genuine good news, though, for those who rely on the state pension. There was some big argument about whether the government would actually fund an inflation or price-linked increase in payments, but they are actually going to go ahead and do that. Inflation was running at 10.1, and they're going to increase the pension payments by exactly the same amount. So some really good news there for people relying on the state pension. And what does that all mean then? Well, first and foremost, as your income or the value of your assets or both rise, it's going to be easier to fall into the higher rate tax brackets. And big focus of this budget has been that those who have or earn more will pay more. Portfolios supporting investment income will also have to work an awful lot harder because you've got to pay more tax at the end. So to get the same net amount out with lower personal tax allowances, your investment is going to have to work harder to compensate. And while incentives to save for your future are still very good, you will have to save more and your investments will have to work harder to get the same benefits out at the end. And I guess the big hope of this budget is that things will improve very significantly over the next few years economically, and that we'll keep saving now and the problems will resolve themselves later on. And as promised, we come to the screaming handbrake turn to end our lean mean tour of the recent budget. But what have we learned? Well, first and foremost, the focus of this budget is that those with wealth are going to be paying a greater share now and in the future to plug the fiscal hole that's been created by your elected leaders, basically. So we all tighten our belt for their mistakes. Great. It was ever thus. Also, making full use of your personal tax allowance is going to have a much smaller effect on mitigating tax because the personal allowance is going to be that much smaller, both in absolute terms and relatively speaking. While incentives to save for a future remain intact, that means your investments are going to have to work an awful lot harder to give you the same standard of benefits and quality of life as a result. What it all boils down to is ultimately for an investor, someone taking financial advice and planning for the future, there's going to have to be a much greater emphasis on investment management to get more out of your money, and some really serious consideration to the integration of some of the more aggressive tax advantage strategies such as venture capital trusts and assets qualified for business property relief. Now, I'm not going to go into that now, but we'll come back to that at another time, and we'll probably have a 7 lecture dedicated to those propositions in and of themselves because they're so important. So, panting for breath as we reach the conclusion of an unusually short and fast-paced 7 lecture, it simply remains for me to remind you that this video is intended to inform, to educate, and to entertain. And by goodness, we certainly need it after something like that. But obviously, this does not represent advice in any way, shape, or form. So we'll leave you to recover for a little while, and we'll be back again very soon with another lecture. We'll see you soon.